Good evening. Tonight we're diving into a story that's quietly shaking the ground beneath our feet. A story that's not just about numbers or markets, but about the daily lives of millions of Americans. While headlines may come and go, the economic tremors we're feeling right now are impossible to ignore, and their impact is being felt in every corner of the country. The American economy feels like a Jenga tower during an earthquake. Everyone insists it's fine, but the cracks are obvious. Each day another block is pulled out, a job lost, a price hiked, a bill unpaid. People are holding their breath, hoping the whole thing doesn't come crashing down. The uncertainty is palpable, and it's not just economists who are worried. It's families, workers, and business owners who see the warning signs in their own lives. Major tech companies are laying off tens of thousands, reversing last year's hiring frenzy. Just months ago, these firms were symbols of unstoppable growth, but now, pink slips are being handed out at a record pace. It's not just tech. Other industries are quietly trimming their workforces too. For every layoff, there's a ripple effect. Families tightening budgets, communities losing spending power, and young professionals rethinking their futures. Grocery bills are soaring, forcing families to make tough choices between gas and groceries. The price of everyday essentials, milk, bread, eggs, has climbed so high that many are forced to put items back on the shelf. Parents are skipping treats for their kids, and some are even skipping meals themselves. The weekly trip to the store has become a source of stress, not comfort. Inflation is hitting hardest at the bottom, eroding savings and security. For those living paycheck to paycheck, every dollar lost to rising prices is a dollar that can't go toward rent, medicine, or a child's education. Even those who once felt stable are now watching their savings dwindle, wondering how long they can hold on. The auto industry faces chaos, and the housing market is now a minefield of high rates and unaffordable prices. Buying a car or a home, once milestones of the American dream, now feel out of reach for many. Dealerships are empty, factories are slowing down, and would-be homebuyers are priced out by soaring interest rates and sky-high listings. The foundations of American prosperity, a good job, a full fridge, a home, are now more like lottery wins than guarantees. For millions, stability is a memory, not a reality. The dream of upward mobility is slipping away, replaced by anxiety and uncertainty about what tomorrow will bring. The official narrative stays rosy, but the gap between what we're told and what we experience is where real danger grows. Politicians and pundits may promise that recovery is just around the corner, but for many, that corner never seems to arrive. It's in this widening gap between hope and reality that frustration, anger, and even despair can take root. And unless we face these tremors head-on, the aftershocks could reshape our society for years to come. Point out economic anxieties and politicians wave jobs reports in your face, record job growth. But the numbers are misleading. The establishment survey often gets revised down, while the less publicized household survey tells a grimmer story. Many new jobs are just people juggling multiple part-time gigs to survive. Much of the job growth is among foreign-born workers, while native-born employment stagnates. The BLS is even changing its methodology, making the real picture murkier. When the numbers get fuzzy just as things look bad, suspicion is warranted. The numbers aren't the economy. They're just our window into it, and right now, someone's fogging up the glass. The US dollar isn't backed by gold, it's backed by faith in America's stability. Global trust in our government and economy creates demand for dollars, letting us borrow cheaply and live beyond our means. But faith is fragile. If the world doubts our ability to pay debts or sees chaos here, that trust evaporates. Countries are already seeking alternatives, slowly eroding dollar dominance. If faith crumbles, the dollar's value will plunge, inflation will soar, and borrowing will become crippling. The exorbitant privilege could vanish overnight, exposing our debts. The dollar is a social contract with the world, and we're testing its limits. Lose that trust, and the consequences will be catastrophic. When the government's tax revenue isn't enough to cover its spending, it faces a choice. Either borrow money, print more, or, as is often the case, do both at the same time. This is where the so-called magic money machine comes into play. The government issues bonds, essentially IOUs, and investors, both domestic and foreign, buy them. But when there aren't enough buyers, or when the government wants to inject even more cash into the economy, it turns to the Federal Reserve for help. The Federal Reserve, often called the Fed, has a powerful tool at its disposal. It can create new money out of thin air. Through a process known as quantitative easing, the Fed buys up government debt by simply adding numbers to its balance sheet. This isn't physical cash, but digital dollars that flow into the financial system, making it easier for the government to spend and for banks to lend. This magic money creation can seem like a miracle at first. It funds stimulus checks, bailouts, and government programs, all without raising taxes. But there's a catch. If the amount of money in the economy grows faster than the supply of goods and services, each dollar becomes less valuable. That's when prices start to rise, and the purchasing power of your savings begins to shrink. The result is inflation. Something every American is feeling right now. Groceries, gas, rent, and everyday essentials all cost more. Families are forced to stretch their budgets, and many are struggling to keep up as their paychecks don't go as far as they used to. When you combine relentless money printing with a rapidly growing national debt, you create a dangerous feedback loop. The government borrows more, prints more to cover the debt, and that extra money fuels even higher inflation. It's a cycle that can quickly spiral out of control if left unchecked. This is the recipe for hyperinflation, a nightmare scenario where faith in the currency collapses, savings are wiped out overnight, and the economy grinds to a halt. People rush to spend their money before it loses even more value, businesses close, and entire communities suffer. The United States isn't at that point yet, but the warning signs are there. Rising debt, persistent inflation, and an over-reliance on money printing are putting us on a risky path. Experts and everyday Americans alike are starting to ask, how much longer can this go on? In the end, printing money to pay the bills is like trying to put out a raging fire with gasoline. It might seem like a quick fix, but it only makes the problem worse. If we don't change course, the consequences could be disastrous for everyone. The US government finances itself like a maxed-out credit card holder, spending far more than it earns. Decades of deficits mean we borrow trillions by selling treasury bonds, IOUs backed by America's reputation. But our debt is now a monster, growing faster than the economy. Deficits are structural, not just for emergencies, and trillion-dollar shortfalls are the new normal. We need buyers for all this debt, but what if they lose interest? To attract them, we'd have to raise interest rates, making borrowing costlier for everyone. The system that kept us afloat could turn against us, making the debt spiral even worse. We're dangerously dependent on the world's willingness to keep lending. As debt grows, so do interest payments, soon to surpass even our military budget. This is a debt spiral. More debt means higher interest, which means more borrowing, and so on. With higher rates, the spiral accelerates. If investors lose confidence, they'll demand even higher rates, fearing we'll pay them back with devalued dollars. At that point, the government faces a brutal choice: slash spending and raise taxes, or print money and risk hyperinflation. Either way, there's no easy escape. The US credit reputation would be shattered. We're borrowing from the future, and the bill, with compound interest, is coming due. The dollar's global dominance is under threat from BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and now major oil nations. Their goal: reduce dependence on the dollar and build an alternative system for trade and finance. US sanctions and asset freezes have made countries wary of dollar exposure. BRICS nations want control over their own economies, not to be at the mercy of US monetary policy. They're building new payment systems and banks to bypass the dollar. Every non-dollar trade chips away at American financial power. If this rebellion succeeds, America's ability to live beyond its means will vanish. Tariffs sound good in speeches, but in a global economy, they often backfire. Tariffs on imports like Chinese steel raise costs for American companies, who pass them to consumers. With much of our manufacturing offshored, we can't just buy American. We pay more for the same imports. Tariffs fuel inflation, hurt businesses, and provoke retaliation from trading partners. Instead of reviving manufacturing, we isolate ourselves and risk trade wars. We're taxing ourselves for past decisions to offshore industry. The result? Higher prices, weaker competitiveness, and angry allies. It's a self-inflicted wound, not a solution. Food inflation isn't just about global turmoil, it's rooted in America's own fields. Chronic farm labor shortages mean crops rot unpicked, shrinking supply and raising prices. Farms rely on immigrant labor, but tighter immigration and politics have choked this workforce. Some farmers invest in automation, but many just quit, selling land and reducing domestic food production. We become more dependent on imports, adding risk and volatility. Immigration policy directly impacts your grocery bill. The health of our farms is national security, and right now, we're letting it slip away. So, where does this end? The warning signs are everywhere, yet so often ignored or downplayed. We have misreported data that clouds our understanding of the real situation, a faith-based currency that relies more on global trust than on solid fundamentals, and runaway debt that keeps piling up with no end in sight. Our rivals, both old and new, are actively working to undermine our dominance on the world stage, while our own policies, especially in trade, sometimes seem to work against us, eroding our competitive edge. And then, there's the farm labor crisis, a problem that might seem isolated but is deeply connected to the broader economic picture. These issues don't exist in a vacuum. They're all intertwined, feeding off each other and amplifying the risks. Together, they're creating what economists call a perfect storm, a convergence of threats that could hit us all at once. By 2027 or 2028, if current trends continue, we'll be facing a reckoning. Our national debt and the interest payments required to service it will reach levels that are simply unsustainable. Every year, more of our budget will go just to paying interest, leaving less for everything else: education, infrastructure, healthcare, and even defense. Meanwhile, the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, will have made significant progress in building alternative financial systems and alliances. Their influence will be stronger, and their ability to challenge the dollar's dominance will be greater than ever before. At home, our economic foundations will be weaker. We'll see more empty factories, more closed storefronts, and communities struggling to adapt to a changing world. The sense of security that once defined the American economy will feel increasingly fragile. All it would take is a major shock, something sudden and unexpected, to set off a chain reaction. The system is already under strain, and a single event could tip it over the edge. It could be another pandemic, a sudden banking crisis, or even a war. Any of these could trigger panic, disrupt markets, and expose just how vulnerable we've become. Imagine a conflict with China, for example. Such a scenario could shatter global supply chains overnight, leaving store shelves empty and factories idle. The flow of goods we take for granted could grind to a halt, sending shock waves through every sector of the economy. In response, we'd be forced to borrow even more money, at a time when lenders are already nervous and interest rates are high. The cost of borrowing would skyrocket, putting even more pressure on our finances. This isn't fear-mongering, this is simple math. The trends are clear, and the numbers don't lie. We're heading toward a tipping point, and the margin for error is shrinking. The warnings are flashing red everywhere you look. Economists, analysts, and even some policymakers are sounding the alarm, but the response so far has been slow and inadequate. We might get lucky, but luck is not a strategy. Right now it feels like we're steering a debt-ridden ship straight into a hurricane. The waves are getting higher, the winds are picking up, and the storm is closing in. If we don't change course, if we don't make tough decisions and take real action, the outcome is inevitable. The crash isn't a question of if, but when. The dominoes are lined up, and all it takes is a single push to set them tumbling. The clock is ticking, and 2027 is coming fast. The time to act is now, before the countdown reaches zero.